Hi, this is your voiceover PowerPoint on vision and visual perception. Let's start by talking about the difference between visual perception and vision. Vision is how your eyes work, how well they see, how well your eyes move together, move independently. Can you focus on different things? And the health of your eyes is included in your vision. Visual perception is how your brain processes the information that comes in through your eyes. So visual perception happens in the brain, but it is based on what you see with your eyes. So you need to be able to take in the visual information correctly and accurately. Your eyes need to be able to function properly. But then once that information is in your eye and in your head, you need to be able to process it in your brain to make sense of it. We'll start with vision. Vision is required as the intake method for visual perception to occur. So light enters the cornea, which is at the surface of the eye in the outermost layer. The lens, which is behind that, focuses the image, and then it lands on the retina upside down, actually. The retina is then connected to the optic nerve, and the optic nerve then transmit the information that is received by the eye, which is now electrical impulses, to different parts of the brain for processing. The retina is a very important part, and if you look at the diagrams in your book, you'll see there's a very nice cross-sectional diagram of the eye, and it shows the retina, which sits at the back of the eye, along the back wall of the eye. And there are diseases of the retina. Retina can be detached, it can become diseased, all sorts of things can happen. The retina is the structure that converts the visual information into electrical impulses that then can be traveled along the optic nerve. So it's essential that your retina is intact and functioning correctly for you to then take that visual information and send it to the parts of the brain where it becomes processed. Infants can see at about 8 to 10 inches, about the distance face to face when you're holding a baby in that cradled position. By preschool, children have essentially 20/20 vision, and people's vision is at their best when they're about 18, and then it slowly declines. There are typical changes in vision as people get older. Presbyopia of middle age is one of them, where you lose both distance and near vision. Some people's vision changes such that they needed glasses when they were young and then they don't need them when they're old, and vice versa. So vision definitely changes as you get older. Let's talk about the kinds of visual pursuits. Visual pursuits are the ways that your eyes move, also called oculomotor control. So this is how your eyes, using the muscles that surround the eye, move in order to take in visual information. Smooth pursuits is following something through the air. So if you see a bird flying and you follow that flying bird with your eyes through space, that is a smooth pursuit. Saccadic movements are the movements that your eyes make when you read. So if you get a chance, watch somebody's eyes when they are reading, and you will see small jumpy movements. Our eyes do not move smoothly when we read. There are short side-to-side little jerky movements that allow us to look at one word and then the next word and then the next word. Some people have faster saccadic movements and some people's are slower, but if the saccadic movements are absent, then a person is not reading. Convergence and divergence. So convergence is when the two eyes come together in order to focus, and convergence is required for what we call binocular vision. So convergence is required so that we can see with both eyes. Our brain needs our eyes to see equally with both eyes. We need to have the same strength in both eyes. When there is a difference in the strength or the power of one eye over the other, then the brain will ignore the weaker eye. And we call this lazy eye, and the brain is ignoring the weaker eye, and then that weaker eye kind of goes off on its own, amblyopia or lazy eye. So the brain is essentially ignoring the information from the weak eye, and the way that's treated is by patching the strong eye so that the brain starts to take information in from the weaker eye, and the weak one becomes stronger, and then they balance, and then it will stay focused forward. Now, we need binocular vision for depth perception and for other visual information, for processing visual information. Our eyes compare the information that we get from each eye once it goes into the retina, into the brain and the optic nerve, and into the brain centers. Our brain is comparing the images we get from each eye, and it wants them to be the same. When the images are different, we have issues with balance. We can have issues with depth perception, all sorts of issues that are not good. So convergence is required for good vision. Divergence is the eyes being able to come apart and see separately. So if you put your hand on your nose so that your index finger is against your nose, your pinky's facing out, and your thumb is facing towards your mouth, you can see on both sides of your hand. So your eyes can diverge to take information in from both sides, but what they want to do is converge at your focal point. So the eyes motorically should be able to move apart and move together. They should be able to move up, down, side to side at angles and around in a circle as smooth pursuits. You should have equal balance in the muscles of your eyes, so your eyes shouldn't be pulled out to the sides or be pulled into the middle. That's usually the cause of a muscle imbalance around the muscles that go around the eye. So low vision and blindness. We often will see children with low vision, visual issues, or blindness. I want to address the concept of cortical blindness or cortical visual impairment. It used to be called cortical blindness. More often now you'll see it as a cortical visual impairment. That is when somebody's eyes, the vision is fine. Their eyes function adequately. They have binocular vision, they have acuity, their eyes move and do everything fine. The problem is in the brain. The problem is that the brain isn't necessarily recognizing the visual information that it is getting from the optic nerve. So sometimes we see children with cortical visual impairment, children that are born with brain damage of one sort or another, and they won't apparently be able to see very well, especially when they're first born, because their brain isn't processing the information. Cortical visual impairment tends to improve as a child gets older because their brain is plastic. We talked about neuroplasticity earlier on. And their brain is plastic enough so that they can start to use other parts of the brain to process that visual information. Well, when children first start to explore their environment, they can see, but they also explore through touch and taste. They want to take everything and touch it and put it up to their mouth and smell and touch and taste. But when children start learning from others in their environment, when they learn how to do tasks, they learn through vision. They learn by imitating. So how does a child learn about walking? They watch people walk. A child learns about putting food in their mouth by watching people put food in their mouth. A child learns about manipulating objects and playing with toys by watching other people manipulate objects and play with them. So children learn through imitating. They clap, they do high fives, they do all sorts of things in imitation. When children can't see or have very limited vision, they have a very hard time learning. Additionally, our gravity and our movement are monitored by our vision. We can feel gravity in our bodies, but we monitor that visually. We tend to, as human beings, rely on vision even when other information is given us that tells us something contrary. So to give you an example, there was an experiment done a long time ago, a very famous experiment, where they created a visual optical illusion with a doorway. And the doorway was created in such a way that it seemed like you had to tip to the side to go through it. In fact, you just walked straight to go through it, but there was an optical illusion. And so people, when they walk through that optical illusion, fall down every time. When they fall down, gravity is telling them that they need to stay vertical, but their eyes are telling them that they need to tip to the side, and so they all fall over. So when we have small children who don't have good vision or who are blind, and there's, of course, different levels of visual impairment, all the way up to profound blindness, but right, there's levels all in between there, just like there is with hearing. Children who are visually impaired or blind are very worried about moving through their environment, usually. Not always, but often. Often they will have a very hard time trying to navigate and negotiate their environment because it's scary to move through the dark. It's scary to move and not know what's going to be under your feet or what obstacles are going to be in front of you. So they tend to have delayed gross motor skills. Since they can't really imitate people manipulating objects very well, they tend to have poor fine motor skills. Since they also can't really tell clothing and where it is and the inside and the outside, and the buttons are really small, and if it doesn't have really good contrast, they might not be able to tell what kind of a garment it is. They tend to have very delayed self-help skills for dressing and for feeding and for all the other self-help skills. Additionally, they have cognitive delays because learning, as I said, is mostly through imitation, and they really can't do that very well. So they tend to have global delays and fear of moving through their environment. Some of the disorders of vision you might find in your practice, one is albinism, or being an albino. So albinism is actually a diagnosis of the eye. It is a visual diagnosis, even though what people see is the lack of pigment in people's skin and hair and the retina of the eye, or the colored part of the eye. They see that as the first outward sign. The actual issue is blindness and visual impairment, and people with albinism tend to have high photosensitivity. They're very, very sensitive to light because they don't have the color. The iris part of the eye is not colored, and so it's just raw blood vessels, which appears when we look at them to be pink because it's the blood vessels, and it exposes those blood vessels to light, and it's very, very sensitive. Also, people with albinism tend to have significant visual impairments in general. It's a diagnosis of vision. So if you've ever worked with somebody with albinism, they will probably wear dark glasses and also corrective lenses to see better. Nystagmus is the eyes flick side to side very quickly. It's when, if you've ever seen anybody that spins in a circle and they spin and spin and spin, and then you stop them really quickly and look at their eyes, you can see their eyes flicking, and the person will report that they are dizzy. So try that one at home. And that's nystagmus, and if your eyes do that all the time, it's a sign that you are having trouble with your balance. So people that have chronic nystagmus have a very hard time navigating their environment. Retinopathy of prematurity. There are many kinds of different problems that can happen with the retina, retinal detachment, and this one is one that we see in preemies. What happens is that when babies are born early, the parts of their biological structure, the parts of their body that aren't ready to be out in the world yet, that aren't fully formed, are the ones we have issues with. So their lungs aren't ready to breathe air yet. They tend to have lung issues. And their eyes aren't supposed to be open yet, so they tend to have issues with their vision. What happens is because their retina is still immature and exposed to light before it's supposed to be, there tends to be an overgrowth of blood vessels on the retina, which can cause the retina to bleed and detach, which can cause visual impairment and also blindness. We see children that don't have good binocular vision. Their eyes don't see together in concert together very much. Which causes them to have difficulty with visual perception because the input is altered, so then the processing of that information in the brain is going to be altered. We see children with visual field cuts, especially children that are born with a CVA, with a stroke, or some sort of brain bleed. It can affect the visual centers of the brain, and they can have a one-sided field cut to the right or left, or sometimes up or down, and they just won't be able to see in that field of their vision. We see severe acuity deficits where children have to hold things very, very close to their face to see them. We see poor eye pursuits where children can't follow things. A lot of times we see what's called a midline jump. So we see a child trying to follow something smoothly across in space like a bird, and when they get to the middle, their eyes flick or they lose it at midline. And that's usually an issue of not well integrated left and right sides of the brain. Children can also have poor pattern recognition where they don't recognize patterns on paper or on whatever surface it's on, and they can't distinguish that. And that pattern recognition is also a visual perceptual issue that we'll get into. And let's get into that right now. So let's talk about visual perception. So now that we've talked about the eyes and what goes on with that, let's talk about how the brain processes the information from the eyes. So visual memory is one that most people can relate to pretty easily. That's the ability to remember a form when you see it. It's taken away and you're given a bunch of other forms, and you can find the one that you saw and you can pick it out from a group of others. So it's remembering a visual form after it's been taken away, holding that in your mind. Visual sequential memory is holding a visual image in your mind also, but it's a series of images. So if you have a circle, square, triangle, and star, and then you're shown those same shapes in all different random ways of putting them together in order, and you can pick out the correct order. That's visual sequential memory. And that's needed, of course, because we need to spell. So spelling is essentially, sight words especially, is an exercise in visual sequential memory. Do I know that my name goes R-O-C-H-E-L-L-E, or do I think my name goes E-L-L-E-R-O-C-H, right? So that would be an incorrect sequence. So we need that for spelling and writing and reading. Visual closure is an important one. Visual closure is the ability to recognize part of a form and know what it would be when completed. So if you have your glasses and they're half sticking out from under your purse, you know that the edge of that form is your glasses. You can complete that in your brain and pull those out and know what that is. It's a very important skill for us to have in terms of visual skill. It allows us to locate things in our environment. It allows us to manipulate objects and have a piece hiding. It allows us to know that you take a piece of bread and once you spread peanut butter on it, the edges that you can see mean there's still a piece of bread under there. It's a very important skill to have. The next one is visual form constancy. That's being able to recognize a form even though it's been altered. Usually in literature, it's made bigger or smaller or shaded or something like that, or the outer edge of it is in a fatter line or a thinner line, but it's the same form. So can you recognize a G, a capital G that is written by hand, and a capital G that is printed on a computer, and a capital G that is in a sans serif font or in Calibri or Arial or Times New Roman? If you can recognize that G in all different forms, then you have good form constancy. And you can see where that's an important skill, so that we can recognize words, letters, shapes, objects in all their different forms and permutations in our environment. You know, a plate is a plate is a plate, whether it's green or blue or orange or a lunch plate or a dinner plate or a platter. You know, these are all plates. So it helps us categorize our environment. Visual discrimination is the ability to distinguish small details in forms, between forms. So the example I gave you here on the slide is an O and a Q. There's just that little teeny line at the bottom of the Q to distinguish it from the O. And that's important. We need to be able to tell the difference between letters, between numbers, between a letter and a number, and all those different things. Some of our letters and numbers, like an S and an 8. So the number 8 and the letter S are very close to each other. They both have that curvy sort of shape. One is connected across the middle and one is not. But you need visual discrimination to be able to tell the difference between an S and an 8. You need visual discrimination to tell the difference between a capital L and a capital I. Especially in some fonts on the computer, it's very hard to tell. In the font that I have up there in front of you right now, if you look at the A and the D, those are very, very close. The D has a little bit taller line on the back than the A. You know the difference. You look at it, you know one's an A and one's a D, but they're pretty close. So that's visual discrimination. Visual figure ground is the ability to pick an object out from a background. So the example I gave you here is Where's Waldo, which is a really easy thing to think about. So visual figure ground is picking something out from a field of other visual information. So doing word searches, doing I Spy, doing any of those sort of things is an activity in visual figure ground. Visual figure ground is a critical skill. It allows us to understand our visual environment, to find things that we need to locate. You open the cupboard and there's a whole bunch of boxes of cereal and you want to find the Cheerios. Having good figure ground allows you to pull out the correct box. So it helps you when you open your closet, pick out the right shirt, all those sort of things. Visual spatial relationships and visual spatial awareness. There's two parts to this one. There's laterality, knowing left and right on your own body, and directionality, which is knowing the left and right side of an object. So it distinguishes the relationships between objects. B and D confusion is the classic example here. People that have visual spatial relations issues or visual spatial awareness issues are kids who can't walk down the hall unless they kind of touch the wall as they go, or kids who mistakenly crash into people or things. They trip a lot. They have a very hard time with their own body awareness. They don't know their left and right. They don't know where their body is. They tend to have a poor body scheme. The two that we see that we teach the most in school, that we instruct children in educational settings, are visual discrimination and figure ground. We teach them. We give kids activities and games that have them find hidden objects all the time. We do visual discrimination, which of these is not like the others, right? We give kids 3 of these are all the same. You know, there's one different, pick it out. So we teach and very carefully train kids on visual discrimination and figure ground. So if a child has trouble with discrimination and figure ground, we know that it's probably a pretty big problem because they've been exposed to a lot of activities that address those two visual perceptual issues.